Hello and welcome to News Now. I'm your host Taylor Inman. We're going over the biggest headlines this week for Northwest Montana. Convicted murderer Kaleb Elijah Fleck on Monday received a partially suspended 50-year sentence to the Montana State Prison for the deadly beating of a homeless man in a dark Kalispell parking lot in 2023. 20-year-old Fleck pleaded guilty to one felony count of deliberate homicide in February after reaching a deal with the prosecutors. He'd initially professed his innocence in the slaying of 60-year-old Scott Bryan, a homeless man who crossed paths with Fleck and a friend outside a gas station at the intersection of Appleway Drive and North Meridian Road on June 25, 2023. Judge Heidi Ulbricht, who presided over the case, stuck to the prosecution's recommended sentence in Flathead County District Court on March 31st. She suspended 10 years of the 50-year sentence and ordered Fleck to pay restitution to cover Bryan's funeral costs, as well as court fines and fees. He received credit for 11 days of time served and was designated a violent offender. Ulbricht said the sentence accounted for Fleck's age at the time of Bryan's death, lack of criminal history, and an evaluation that showed him to be at low risk for reoffending. It also addressed the severity of the crime, she said. While handing down the sentence, she said, quote, "Kaleb Fleck brutally assaulted Scott Bryan, causing an open skull fracture and part of a nasal bone protruding out of his forehead." Ulbricht added Fleck left Bryan in the parking lot, never calling 911 or summoning help. Fleck's defense attorneys, Sean and Julian Hinchy of Hinchy & Hinchy, unsuccessfully argued for a 40-year prison sentence with 20 years suspended. They also asked that Ulbricht put the 21 months Fleck had spent wearing a GPS monitoring device toward his time served, a request she rejected. Fleck, now the father of a young child, paused to hug friends and relatives in the courtroom before being led away stone-faced by detention center officers. His hands were clasped behind his back, one rhythmically squeezing the other as he departed, a crumpled tissue caught between them. He had offered only a few apologetic words before learning his sentence. He said, quote, "I'd just like to say how sorry I am. Since this happened, not a day goes by that I don't think about it," end quote. Prior to the sentencing coming down, a parade of Fleck's friends and relatives took the witness stand to testify on his behalf. While acknowledging that Fleck had admitted to beating a man so badly that he later died, they described his actions as a mistake. Some sought to push blame onto others, including the victim and society at large. In seeking a lighter sentence, Julian Hinchy described Bryan as on methamphetamine and amphetamine among other drugs as he emerged out of the darkness and came toward the vehicle that Fleck was sitting in with a friend. He was rambling, she said, and went for the passenger side door, which is where Fleck was sitting. She also cited the wider strife in the community over homelessness at the time. While homeless people were reportedly being targeted for violence in Kalispell, they were also committing violence, she said. For evidence, Hinchy pointed to the Jonathan Douglas Shaw murder trial, which began in the weeks following Bryan's death. She described Shaw, who was convicted of killing a Fuel Fitness employee, as a transient living in the gym's parking lot. Shaw had outfitted a trailer as a living space after his father's death, according to testimony in court documents. The two had previously lived together in a Kalispell apartment. But prosecutor Caitlin Creighton told the court that arguments made in Fleck's support suggested the life of a drug addict or homeless person was worth less than someone else's. Prosecutors later played a video posted to the social media platform Snapchat following the deadly beating. It featured Fleck and another man celebrating. A handful of relatives and friends spoke on Bryan's behalf during the sentencing. Bryan's sister, Holly Torska, told the court that the 60-year-old man had weathered a myriad of struggles over the years. He had suffered a brain injury early in life and battled epilepsy and cancer, which resulted in the loss of a lung. She said his health conditions meant he could not work, adding that it also meant he posed little threat to Fleck. She urged residents of Kalispell to show more compassion toward their neighbors, particularly those who are struggling. The Flathead Valley's food banks are grappling with how to fill funding gaps left by cuts to federal food assistance programs amid rising demand for services. The county is home to several food banks that provide both fresh and non-perishable goods to thousands of families, seniors, and working people. While food banks stock their shelves in various ways, including private donations, grocery surpluses, and buying food, they also lean on the federal government for assistance in buying fresh, homegrown items. But the Trump administration axed 2 U.S. Department of Agriculture programs that gave schools and food banks the opportunity to buy locally, halting more than $1 billion in federal spending. $500 million in funding was also canceled from a 40-year-old federal program that provided emergency food assistance to low-income individuals, which also helped stock food pantries in the Flathead Valley. When the Flathead Food Bank and North Valley Food Bank needed to stock up on milk, eggs, or fresh produce, they looked to the local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement program to reimburse those purchases. But the program is going to sunset this year and will not be renewed. And Chris Sidmore, the executive director of the Flathead Food Bank in Kalispell, doesn't see any new funding opportunities popping up. Established in 2021, the program was meant not only as a tool to ensure that more Montana food is ending up on the plates of Montanans, but also to initiate long-term buyer-seller relationships that will grow our local food economy, according to the federal agency's website. The Flathead Food Bank received $112,000 dispersed over 18 months through the program that will end in May. When funding runs out, Sidmore expects a reduction in the number of eggs and fresh produce on pantry shelves because the food bank won't be able to match the grant money lost. At one point, Sidmore was not sure whether the federal government would reimburse the food banks on goods already purchased. North Valley Food Bank Executive Director Sophie Albert previously expected to see the program come back again after spending $155,000 awarded through the program over 2 years. A spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Agriculture said the pandemic-era program will, quote, now be sunsetted at the end of the performance period, marking a return to long-term, fiscally responsible initiatives. Albert expects rural pantries to be hit the hardest by the $500 million canceled from the Emergency Food Assistance Program, which was sourced from the Commodity Credit Corporation and amounts to 40% of the program. While North Valley, based in Whitefish, serves around 1,200 people a week, it also acts as a food hub for northwest Montana, supplying groceries to Fast, Blackfeet, and Browning and rural pantries in Yak, Eureka, Libby, and Troy. The goods, which consist of produce, dairy, meat, and shelf-stable items, are delivered from the Montana Food Bank Network based in Missoula, which receives federal dollars from the Emergency Food Assistance Program to dole out goods to food banks across the state. The state food bank supplied 5 food banks in the Flathead Valley with almost 450,000 pounds of emergency assistance food last year, around 181,000 pounds of which were funded through the Commodity Credit Corporation. Albert expects to see a $120,000 gap from the funding loss, with no other option than to fill it because of demand. But she says the rural pantries North Valley supplies will be the most impacted. The Whitefish and Kalispell Food Bank stocks shelves partly through grocery store rescue, which involves gathering edible food that would otherwise go to waste from grocery stores. But the Big Fork Food Bank doesn't have access to many grocery stores like the more populated neighboring towns do. That's why Executive Director Jamie Quinn said the loss in goods will need to be made up either through more private donations or buying the food. Because 90% of the Flathead Food Bank's revenue comes from private donations, Sidmore doesn't see a substantial loss in service in the near future, but expects more effort to go into finding non-governmental grants and organizing fundraisers to fill the gap in supply. But looking further down the road, Sidmore sees money getting tighter as operational costs rise with demand. Last year, the food bank distributed 1.8 million pounds of food, half of which is donated from grocery stores, farmers, or the community. The other half is purchased, which amounts to a bill at about $26,000 per month. The Flathead Food Bank saw a record number of visits in January at around 2,200 people, up 15% from the previous January. Demand across all services, which includes senior and stewed food and assistance and mobile pantries, rose 12% between 2023 and 2024, which Sidmore expects to hold steady. Over 76% of food pantry visitors last year reported either were active income or elderly trying to live off of retirement. At Big Fork, Quinn compared food banks to a canary in the coal mine because they are often the first service people turn to during a difficult time, whether that is teetering on the line of homelessness, struggling with unemployment, or other situations. She expects more cuts to federal food programs to come. Critics say new legislation in the Montana House criminalizing the harboring of people with unknown immigration status could put hospitals, churches, and community organizations at risk. Representative Lucas Schubert, a Republican from Evergreen, introduced House Bill 896 after the House voted down similar legislation earlier in the session. The bill adds new definitions to Montana's obstruction of justice law, making it illegal to harbor or assist a person who has, quote, entered the United States in violation of law. Representatives from religious and nonprofit organizations across the state opposed the bill at an April 1st House Judiciary Committee meeting, arguing that the legislation's broad reach would hamper the provision of key social services to all Montana residents, regardless of immigration status. Kelson Young, the director of the Montana Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, said the bill would make the coalition's services, along with the services provided by hospitals, churches, and other community organizations, illegal, as staff are unable to verify the immigration status of everybody they serve. Clients may not always have documentation on hand when accessing crisis services, such as a domestic violence shelter, and even with documentation, it is difficult to ascertain someone's status without an extensive knowledge of immigration law. Representatives from the Montana Coalition Against Homelessness, the Montana Nonprofit Association, and the Montana Catholic Conference also spoke in opposition of House Bill 896. No proponents supported the bill at the hearing, but Schubert defended the legislation's hardline approach to immigration. He said, quote, I know in Flathead County we have an organization that does help illegal aliens remain in our state, and this is something that's totally unpopular. He said, "You know these people are doing this. They're bringing them into Montana, into Flathead County," end quote. Mary Poole, the executive director of the Missoula-based nonprofit Soft Landing, who works closely with the organization in question, said Schubert's claims were unfounded, but he repeated this accusation in his closing remarks. Republican U.S. Representative Ryan Zinke last year claimed that a Flathead Valley nonprofit worked with the Biden administration to move an immigrant family to the Flathead Valley, described as Venezuelan, but didn't provide evidence to back up the assertion. During the hearing in Helena, Schubert added that it, quote, "doesn't make sense for the Montana Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence to oppose the bill, quote, considering all the sexual violence that illegal immigrants commit against Americans in this country." U.S. Customs and Borders Protection reported 224 convictions for sexual offenses committed by individuals in the country illegally during fiscal year 2024. By comparison, in Montana, the Montana Department of Justice recorded over 2,200 sexual assault convictions in 2024. The House Judiciary Committee passed House Bill 896 along party lines. The bill will now move to the House floor for a second reading. Thanks for joining us. News Now is a podcast from the Daily Interlake. We're proud to be the largest independent newsroom in Montana and the longest continuously published newspaper in the region. Today's stories were written by Daily Interlake news editor Derek Perkins and reporters Jack Underhill and Haley Smalley. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss an episode of the pod. Everybody stay safe and have a great week. Thanks to our sponsor, Lauren's Auto Repair at 1309 U.S. Highway 2 in Kalispell. Most consistently rated 5-star shop serving the Kalispell area. Visit lawrensauto.com.